Welcome to Mid-Level Adventurers, a podcast where non-experts talk about the things they love. I'm Jarrod, and with me for this first series is my co-host, Matt Morris.
Hello everyone, I'm Matt Morris.
Earlier in this series, we talked about some tips and tricks and a brief guide on creating your Dungeons & Dragons characters. Now you've created one, you've learned how to fight, you cast your few spells, you know how to roll saving throws, but now you've reached 4th level and it's time to level up, and it's the first time for you to customize your character just a little bit more. But how can you do that? By opting to take a feat. So the first question, what the hell is a feat, and what is the point of them? And what do they give you? Why should you take one? So Matt, why don't you tell me your definition of a feat? Give me a rundown on why you think they may be a good option for folks.
A feat, as I understand it, is it like an optional special ability? Maybe it grants you an additional combat maneuver, or a proficiency in a certain weapon.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it grants you sort of an additional boost to your already natural abilities in spellcasting. And it might also allow characters to pick something that makes them a little more versatile that may be outside of their base class. Or it might just strengthen what is in their base class. The reason I say they're optional is because at 4th level and every level afterwards, where a feat is a choice, you can also choose to increase your ability scores. So it's one or the other.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So instead of increasing your strength or your wisdom score, you can gain a new ability, such as increasing your speed, gaining new skill or equipment proficiencies. So you hit the nail right on the head.
Nice.
If you're a fighter and you get your strength score up to 20, you cannot increase an ability score above 20 via the ability score enhancement option. It can only be done by magic or by magical items.
That's right, yeah.
So when you get to that point, feats become very attractive options.
Yeah, and even before that point, you might have had a really good roll with your build, and there might just be one or two things you want to take early on to give you a leg up. It's not something that, once you take a feat, you have to take a feat every time it comes up, right? You can mix and match, take a feat first.
And some feats do grant you an ability score boost in them as well.
Ooh. That's interesting.
For example, there are feats that will give you a special combat option, but also may give you a +1 to your strength.
Ah, that's very nice.
Feats allow players to make their characters more unique, more effective, more customized, and they give you little tricks that you can use in or out of combat, and the in-world explanation for it is that you've been training or teaching yourself this maneuver or how to do this special thing that the feat allows you to do. As of right now, there are about 60 official feats that are not Unearthed Arcana.
Okay.
And Wizards definitely has a few out in Unearthed Arcana right now that they're playtesting. But with the just released Rime of the Frost Maiden adventure and Tasha's Cauldron of Everything coming out in November, I am sure that the number of feats and options is increasing by a lot, especially from Tasha's.
That'll be interesting to see, and it'll be fun to get some more opinions on people's best and worst once we get a new list.
Since that's a brief overview of what a feat is, what kind of feats are there? Are there types of feats? The short answer is yes. I group them into 3 kind of categories: utility, specialization, and combat. And there's some overlap there. For the most part, I think that every feat can be thrown into one of those 3 categories. And there are even feats that have prerequisites on them, like you have to have a strength score of X or an intelligence of X, or you have to be a certain species to obtain the feat.
Yes. There are a couple I noticed that are like that. Which is kind of cool.
It puts you more in touch with your character's origin.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So as I mentioned, I feel that feats are broken up into 3 groups, right? So utility, specialization, and combat. I view utility feats, such as medium armor proficiency,
Okay,
as feats that allow you to make yourself more stable, either in combat or out of combat, but something that doesn't affect how you interact with the world. It's of how the world interacts with you, if that makes sense.
Sure, yeah.
For example, by taking medium armor proficiency, you become harder to hit.
Right. And what would you classify, how about something that buffs maybe one of your skills or something? Would that also go into, or is that a specialization?
Well, that could be a specialization. It depends what the other half of the feat is. For example, the actor feat.
I was just looking at that one, actually.
Yeah, it grants you advantage on checks to pretend to be someone you're not. That falls into what I call the specialization category because it has a specific purpose that you are trying to achieve with your character. You're trying to make your character be a better imposter or infiltrator or liar.
Yeah.
Or negotiator even.
Sounds useful for bards, rogues, and the like.
Yeah. Clerics.
Clerics, yeah.
There are clerics of Mask in the Forgotten Realms.
Yeah. Paladin also relies a lot on charisma.
Sure, but they tend to be pretty open about who they are. But not all of them. There are blackguards and all sorts of fallen paladins, broken oath paladins.
I like the discussion that just a single feat can open up about where it can be used, because as we just pointed out, there are a few that I think you could say, limited use here, but there are quite a few I think that are open and useful to multiple classes and species.
Absolutely. And then combat feats, I feel, are pretty straightforward. They grant you bonuses or abilities directly in combat, such as the Martial Adept feat, which grants you some abilities of the fighter's Battlemaster archetype. You get to choose a couple combat maneuvers.
Right.
And you get 1d6 superiority die.
Yeah.
Feats are kind of a wide and varied field, which makes them kind of interesting because you can use a feat to gain magic if you're a more martial character, but if you want the ability to cast like a cantrip or something, there are feats that you can take that will allow you to do that.
Yeah.
Or if you are a caster, you can start taking feats to learn how to wear armor. Because unlike previous editions of Dungeons & Dragons, armor does actually not prevent casters from casting spells. They do not cast spells at disadvantage if they are armored. They just need to take the proficiency because they are not granted it by their base class. So you can have a wizard in full plate mail if you invest time and effort. The light armor proficiency feat, the medium armor proficiency feat, and the heavy armor proficiency feat. Now granted, that is 3 feats that you would need to take in order to get there.
And the level that you take feats is slightly different depending on class. For some reason, every 4 is stuck in my head, but I know that's not true.
It used to be in, I think, 4th or 3.5.
Okay.
So it might be that way in Pathfinder. I'm not too sure.
I think it is, yeah.
So what feats have you used in the past, and what feats are you looking forward to applying to these characters?
All right, so officially, in 5e at least, haven't actually reached a level where I've taken any feats with the character. I'm just going to say it. I have technically in our Pathfinder game, but their feat system is kind of different. We're a little focused on 5e in this, so I'm not going to go into that.
Are they actually called feats in Pathfinder?
They are. Yeah, they are.
I'm not surprised by that. I wouldn't know another name to call them off the top of my head.
I want to say 2e Pathfinder changes it up a bit, but the Pathfinder first edition is fairly similar to 3.5.
Well, yeah, we've talked about this before.
I feel like the feat system is basically the same for the two. Don't quote me on that. Okay, but so for instance, my fighter, one of the things I'm looking forward to is taking Dual Wielder, which is, I think, really cool. If you talk to min-maxers, they'll tell you that there are other combat-oriented feats that are better, so that's fine.
Yeah, it's all in your play style and the flavor you want for your character.
Yeah, I find this one's very cool. You basically get an AC bonus when you're wielding a separate melee weapon in your offhand.
Yeah, it pretty much acts as a little mini shield.
Yeah. So that's cool, honestly. You get 2 attacks with 2 weapon fighting, so now you get just a slight boost. It kind of makes up a little bit for the fact that you didn't choose to have a shield, for instance. Mm-hmm. The kind of limiting factor before this feat is the offhanded weapon needs to be a light weapon, but now it does not.
That's right.
And you can, draw and stow 2 weapons at a time. Is where I think, depending on how your DM rules it, it's normally like one and then the other or something. Something like that I find very cool. So looking forward to picking that. Another cool fighter-oriented feat, or barbarian, I suppose, that I've heard good things about and might be really fun to play is Great Weapon Master.
Yes.
That one I think just makes you sort of this unstoppable killing machine as long as you have a large 2-handed weapon, I think. Is that correct?
Yeah, a heavy weapon, specifically.
Heavy weapon. Gotcha.
Not 2-handed, because then you could do it with versatile weapons.
So that's very cool. This one in particular has, let's see, when you score a critical hit with a melee weapon or reduce a creature to 0 hit points with one, you can make 1 melee weapon attack as a bonus action. So that's kind of devastating.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
And there's more to it, but I'm not going to spend too much time on each one of these because we'll be here all day. So those are just 2 right off. Once upon a time when I was going to play a halfling, I actually was looking forward to the fact that halflings kind of already get they have like a luck bonus in some of their species and racial traits. And one that you can take specifically as a halfling is Bountiful Luck. Mm-hmm. The other one is what a lot of people, I think, classify as one of the better feats in the game. It's just called Lucky. You could put that on anyone. It doesn't have to be a halfling. I feel like anyone could take that and benefit from it.
Yep.
That one in particular, just so I don't miss out on explaining it, you get to re-roll a d20 if you don't like the results. And I think the craziest thing about it is you don't have to declare it before the roll. I think you can wait and see.
You can see what you rolled, but before the result of that roll is determined,
you have to choose. I want to say you can also cause enemies to re-roll.
Mm-hmm.
You obviously don't know what they roll, right? So it's like...
Yeah, you don't know what they rolled.
Right.
Unless your DM is rolling in the open, which sometimes they do. It's up to you as the DM to figure that out.
So yeah, those are just a few just tossed out there. What about you?
Well, I usually DM a lot, so I don't have too much feat experience in terms of applying them to characters for myself. I've definitely helped people with it, but for my gnome, I have used the mobile feat because I kind of feel that gnomes get a little bit cheated in character creation because only they and halflings have a speed of 25, but every other small species in the game, kobolds, goblins, get a speed of 30.
That is odd.
So I feel they get a little bit nerfed.
Yeah.
So I took the mobile feat, which increased my speed by 10, so now I'm faster than most of my party members because I have a speed of 35.
Just hilarious. Little gnome just zipping around.
The reason my character did this was because one of the original party members was a monk, and so he was skipping around, and my gnome used to live at the top of Trollskull Manor, so I imagined that he was like trying to get faster by running up and down the stairs as part of his training every day.
Yeah.
He took the feat when he achieved that goal.
That's very good. I like that.
It also means that as long as he makes at least one melee attack against a creature, he can then move without provoking an opportunity attack from that creature.
Okay.
So as a fighter, he can make an attack against a creature, move to another creature, make another attack, and keep moving. Because he's got 2 attacks, so he can just... It allows him to, as a battle master, move around the field a little bit more.
Sure.
Which is something that appeals to me, because I imagine him as becoming a tactician.
Yeah.
Which is funny, because he has an intelligence of 10. He's not very smart in worldly things, but he's average intelligence, but he knows about fighting and battle.
Yeah, he's got this one specialty.
Yeah, so that's why. I've also made feats with players in the past.
Oh, that sounds fun.
Yeah, in a previous campaign, I had a player who was a paladin to the god of misfortune. So he essentially reskinned the lucky feat into its opposite.
Oh, interesting.
So he could impose disadvantage on people and a variety of things a couple times a day.
Very cool.
And I am actually going to propose to the DM for my Waterdeep game to pretty much reskin Great Weapon Master into Versatile Weapon Master.
Oh, cool.
Because my gnome fights with a longsword as a versatile weapon. He uses it as a great sword because as a small creature, he cannot wield a great sword.
Right.
But he really wants to. So he uses his longsword in the same kind of fashion as one who is 6 feet tall would use a greatsword. So I just proposed the idea, hey, what do you think about just renaming it Versatile Weapon Master? And it's got all the same things, except when you are using a weapon two-handed, it gets put in place of heavy weapon.
Makes sense. Sounds like that would probably go over with your DM, knowing who it is. So.
Yeah, he seemed okay with the idea. I mean, I'm a few levels off from applying that change, but
right.
I'm sure he is going to look into it and decide if he's okay with it. I can't imagine he would not be. One fun little segment we have here on Mid-Level Adventurers is our Tavern Corner, where we talk about what we are imbibing tonight. So, Matt, what are you imbibing this evening in the tavern?
So, tonight, I am sticking with local New York beers. Kind of a big one this time. I'll just take an aside to say I love finding small, tiny, up-and-coming breweries in and around New York State. But this one's a well-known one. It's a big one. Brooklyn Brewery. Mm-hmm. We've talked about it before. Maybe we've drank it before.
Yeah, I had their Oktoberfest a couple weeks ago.
Ah, that's right. So tonight is kind of I'm going to do a double whammy because I've had 2 of theirs tonight. So... One of which is the Oktoberfest. I wanted to try it and see how I liked it. It sounded delicious, and it is. I don't really like lagers that much. Almost always, I will turn down a lager. Brooklyn has a couple of really good ones that I like. They're normal, like Brooklyn lager, because they call it a hoppy amber lager. So I like it for the reasons that Jarrod probably doesn't like it as much. Mm-hmm. It's the anti-lagers lager, I guess. And then the Oktoberfest is a Marzen lager. It's, I like German lagers. Maybe that's the rule. So it's tasty. Not much more to say about that, except it was delicious, caramelly, malty, just refreshing and crisp. And then the other one I tried because I bought a mixed pack is something that they brewed for Pride. I think. Oh. They started it a couple years ago, I think. So I don't think it's super brand new. But it's the Stonewall Inn IPA.
Oh, yes, I have seen this, yeah. I would totally drink it and support, but I don't like IPAs.
Well, see, and I tried it for research for you, in a weird way, because I thought, this might be something that Jarrod would drink, because it's not super IPA-y. It's a session IPA. It's not extra hoppy. Got a little, hop fruit flavors to it. But for me, at least, it's very mild. It's a session, first of all, so they tend to be a little less bitterness. less alcohol. It's only a 4%er. It's actually less calories. It's advertised as being a 95 calorie beer. So I got duped into drinking a low calorie beer by Brooklyn Brewery because I don't seek those out. But it was good. So it's, I think it would be an IPA you could get behind.
All right. Well, again, if I don't have to buy a 6-pack of it, I'll try it.
Yeah, it came with a mixed pack there were 3 Oktoberfest, and on the box it just says seasonal, but because it's September. 3 of the Stonewall Inn IPAs, 3 of their sours, which you've never had, they're pretty good, and 3 of the Brooklyn lagers.
Very cool.
How about you? What you imbibing tonight?
Tonight, I have gone up a little more northeast to Boston and Vermont for a UFO pumpkin wheat beer, or Weiss beer.
So it begins, the pumpkin beers.
Yeah, I normally stay away from pumpkin, but I've never had the UFO. I've seen it before, but I've never actually had it. And I stayed away because I always assumed it was an ale, and I do not like pumpkin ales.
That's fair.
Which is weird because I really like ales for the most part.
Right.
Like a red ale or a brown ale.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not a big fan of pumpkin ales for some reason. I don't know if it's the combination of spices and flavors or what. But the UFO pumpkin Weiss beer is actually really, really good. It's much more mellow, and it actually tastes more like pumpkin as opposed to squash.
Yeah.
But it almost has a particulate feel on the very tail end of the drink, but not in an unpleasant way, just kind of a surprise the first time.
It is interesting that it's a Berliner Weiss and not an ale, because I don't think I've ever seen that before.
Yeah, I had not, which is why I finally caved, and I was like, oh, because I always just assumed.
Yeah, they're ales, and sometimes they're quite heavy or very heavy on the spices.
Yeah, and this is really mild and not overtly in-your-face cinnamon, clove, and nutmeg.
Oh, good. Yeah, I'll have to try that. Maybe I'll seek it out. I've had UFO's wheat beer, whatever. So. And
they are employee-owned, so they're a small, independent crafter.
Yeah.
And that is what we are drinking tonight in the Tavern Corner. But what are some of your favorite feats, and are there any you dislike? It's actually funny, you already talked about one that I think is very popular, even if it's not on the top min-maxer list. But I think Dual Wielder is actually a really popular, fun feat.
Yeah, I think it's very cool. I only threw out if you're worried about complete DPS, damage per second, output, in-game kind of stuff.
Well, then you should only be a great weapon fighter.
Yeah, exactly. And like a barbarian with a certain totem or whatever. Yeah, and you need to be a half-orc, great. So play that same character every time. Yes, the number crunchers have done the math and, whatever. I really don't care because it is such a fun, and depending on the character you're playing with and the style, it just sounds like a cool combat choice, if for nothing else, for flavor.
And it allows you to be Drister Orden.
Yeah, exactly. But I digress. There are so many of these that I'm going to admit here, I'm cheating a little bit, right? I'm taking other people's advice that I have taken just when I was doing a lot of research and kind of, perusing people's top 10 list. And spoiler alert, they kind of overlap a lot. I feel like there's a pretty big general consensus on the 10 or 12 feats that are just really important. So I'll just go over a few that I think sound cool. And some of these we've already mentioned, but another one that's another combat-oriented one that sounds really cool, Crossbow Expert.
Yeah.
I don't have a character right now that would use it, but it just sounds really awesome if you wanted to add a ranged attack option to maybe a melee fighter or somebody that already was doing ranged attack and you just want to get better at it.
Yeah, and it lets you ignore the loading property on crossbows.
And that is what makes it so crazy. Because that's probably the biggest disadvantage to a crossbow versus a bow. And then suddenly you're like, oh, well, it doesn't matter how long it takes to load the crossbow. You ignore that. And you can use a hand crossbow, if I'm not mistaken, as a bonus action.
Correct.
Which is very cool also. So that's kind of neat. That might be something that I can see maybe my fighter taking down the road as just an extra versatility thing.
Just have it in your boot and ting.
Yeah. Again, I'll stick with combat for now. This one's kind of funny. There are 2 feats I'll name that I think are kind of well known as being paired together very often. That's Polearm Master and Sentinel.
Ugh, Sentinel.
Yes, there's definitely some grief that Sentinel usually gives DMs, I think, and it's probably the way it's written.
Sentinel is a great feat for players. For me as a DM, I hate it so much. It's great. It does exactly what it is supposed to do. It totally makes sense. But man, it frustrates me when my creatures can't get away from the paladin because he hits them with an attack every time.
Yep. And the reason I think that Polearm Master gets combined with this so often is because you get the reach with Polearm Master, and you get a reaction, if I'm not mistaken. Is it with Polearm Master that you get the reaction that if you take like a 5-foot step back and someone comes into your threatened square again, you get to attack with the reaction?
Yeah, when you are wielding a reach weapon, essentially, or whatever the list is, whenever they enter your reach, you can poke at them, as long as you have a reaction.
Oh, right. And you only get one, I think.
You only get one reaction per round, and it recharges at the start of your turn, so...
Gotcha. So those make sense together if you wanted to play someone like that. I think a polearm wielding melee character is actually a really cool idea.
Oh yeah, no, they're very effective.
Yeah, it's not often done. I mean, there's so many, like you could be a knight, you could be, I don't know, just a pikeman or whatever. I haven't done it yet. Sounds really cool. Some other ones, if you wanted to, you mentioned this earlier, is Magic Initiate, I think, or Initiate.
Yeah, Magic Initiate.
It allows you, if you're, speaking of melee people wanting to add some versatility, I think it allows you to pick...
You get 2 cantrips and a first level spell.
Which is really cool. If you just need some ranged options as a fighter or something like that. Or maybe,
See, there would be no point for my gnome taking that because he's got all 10s in those stats.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So he'd have a +0 to all of his saves and attacks.
And so that's a good point, because it does take some planning, I think, with some of these. Like, you want to kind of...
It all depends on your build.
Yeah, right. You don't want to get to some of these and be like, that'd be really cool to take, and then take it and realize, oh, because of the way I set up my character, now it's not as useful. That would suck.
Yeah, and if a player ever had that kind of thing, they should definitely talk with their DM about it.
Yes, yeah.
And maybe there's a way to work it out, and maybe there isn't. Maybe you just have to move on and select something else.
Yeah, right. I would like to think that, like, if I came in unknowingly to one of your games like that and you were like, oh, by the way, that's not really going to work like you think it is. Yeah, a lot of these, I have to say, a lot of these on the list, just perusing, are weapons focused. But, I guess that makes sense. A lot of the classes are weapons based. Another one is Sharpshooter. And I think its big thing is you get to ignore 1/2 and 3/4 cover, which is kind of nuts. It almost doesn't make sense. It's like bending the bullet in that movie with Morgan Freeman and that other guy. You can like shoot I guess, I don't know if you lob the arrows on top of people. That's how good you are now.
Yeah, you either like shoot up in the air or you ricochet it off, like Captain America's shield or Xena's chakram or something.
Yeah, you're like Legolas meets Robin Hood. I can see if you made a ranger and you took crossbow expert and sharpshooter, for instance. Holy cow. You would be like Legolas.
And you pretty much have like an unlimited range because as long as you are within your long range, you don't have disadvantage on attack rolls.
Yeah, you would have the best of both worlds, I guess, with those two. You'd have the crossbow, like hand crossbow for short.
And you can take a -5 to the attack and get +10 damage.
Yes, which is probably huge and like in-game stuff.
Especially if you are a hunter ranger.
Yes. You're already going to get, the advantage when you mark.
Yeah, and you have Colossus Slayer.
Yeah. I think my next character is going to be a ranger now.
Our Kenku Ranger in my home game has all of those, and the first attack after someone's already been damaged, the first attack on a creature is just like, here's 45 points of damage on one attack. And I'm just like, okay, kill Ranger.
We need to talk about underrated classes in a future episode, because I feel like Ranger is like #1 underrated.
Well, Beastmaster Ranger is really not good in the handbook.
Oh,
but that
sad.
Is a different conversation.
Yeah, different story. Play a druid.
Or a different ranger.
Or a different ranger. Multi-class. That's a whole other conversation too, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'll try to go through some of these other ones quick. Just so I've mentioned the ones that come up a lot as really good feats that you should know about. Healer is one. I think that's another one that might be handy for let's say you're short a healing class in the party. For instance.
If you don't have a life cleric or a dedicated healer.
Healer could be really awesome. The way it was explained to me is in a video on YouTube. is you spend an action to take someone from dying from rolling death saves to 1 HP. Doesn't sound like a lot. It's not a lot of healing in terms of hit points. But you just took someone who was lying on the floor having to roll death saves, and now on their turn they can stand up and attack someone again.
Correct.
And it resets at a short rest, which is huge. So it's, arguably it could, with a medicine kit, could maybe replace, or if you were low in health potions, for instance, you got this in a health kit.
It essentially allows anyone to have a good berry on hand.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
Yep.
Yeah. So if you don't have a druid, you don't have a cleric, take healer. And then alert, I think, last but not least, certainly, it gives you a +5 initiative. Yeah. And there's some other things too here. I need to read the rest of it.
Which honestly, I've been thinking about for my gnome because he's got a +1 on initiative, and I always roll bad initiative, so he's at 7, 12.
Yeah.
I think once I rolled a natural 20.
I have the same problem. I've started to learn that like initiative is so huge sometimes when you've got maybe your whole battle plan hinges on just getting to do this one thing before the enemies attack. I mean, I've seen encounters go very badly because I planned out something in my head, how to use my like action economy, and then I forgot, but that enemy attacks before our next player does, and now we're doomed.
Yep. Yeah. Initiative order is surprisingly heavy in tactics. It really is.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes it just makes sense to have, like, it's kind of sad when your fighter and your barbarian, those frontline fighters, roll like 7. Mm-hmm. And now they're attacking last.
Which is why alert is so great for those classes.
Yeah. That alone boosts you up to a 12, which is, not a great, but a decent initiative. Certainly better than a 7. So, that's one that I think anyone could benefit from. Resilient is another one, actually. I said that really strangely, but for spellcasters, we left those out of the list. Yeah. If my understanding is you don't lose concentration as easily when you have a spell going and take damage.
No, resilient is you get a proficiency in a new saving throw.
Oh, I have totally misinterpreted that.
You're thinking of Warcaster.
I'm thinking of Warcaster, yeah.
Yes, Warcaster is actually on my list. It's a great feat for casters in battle. Mm-hmm. It allows you to have advantage on Constitution saving throws to maintain concentration on spell effects. And you can perform semantic components if you have a weapon or shield in both hands, so you don't need one hand free. So it's really good for clerics in battle as well.
That's good to know, as I am playing a cleric.
And you can actually use your reaction to cast a spell as an opportunity attack, instead of having to make a melee opportunity attack.
Oh, that is good. Wow, this feat...
It has to have a one-action casting time, and it has to target only that one creature, so you couldn't, fireball that creature.
Sure.
But you could shocking grasp that creature.
With enough time, that could change the effects of a whole combat, just getting that in early.
Oh, yeah. Some of my other favorites, Savage Attacker.
It sounds cool.
Once per turn, when you roll damage for a melee weapon, you can re-roll the weapon's damage dice and use whichever total is higher.
Whoa! Okay, that's pretty awesome.
Which means if you have abilities that let you attack on other people's turns, like opportunity attacks or commander strike with your from within your party,
your battle master fighter.
Yeah, if you have a battle master in your party that can tell the rogue to make another attack, that rogue also gets sneak attack again, because sneak attack is per turn, not per round.
That's important.
And Savage Attacker is per turn, not per your turn, but per turn, which means that if they roll really low on their sneak attack damage, they can re-roll it as Savage Attacker. Yeah. It's a really great feat for rogues, or really anybody who deals weapon damage a lot, especially once you get magic weapons that add more dice.
That makes sense. Yeah, I can imagine some mid to end game stuff with that being pretty devastating.
I think Tough is a really underrated feat.
Yeah.
Tough allows you a bigger hit point pool.
Yep.
And every time you level, it backtracks and it adds up. So.
Oh, that's good. I might take that as my cleric, honestly.
Yeah, it's good for any class. Frontline fighters, squishy glass cannons. It's good for anybody. I think Keen Mind can be useful. I think it's kind of an interesting flavor feat. I would put it in the specialization or utility category, probably.
Yeah, that one I'm not as familiar with, actually. I haven't read up on it as much.
Yeah, so Keen Mind, your intelligence goes up by 1 to a max of 20. You always know which way is north, so you can't get lost.
Oh.
You always know the number of hours left before the next sunrise or sunset, so you always know what time of day it is.
Okay.
And you can accurately recall anything you have seen or heard within the past month. So it pretty much gives you an eidetic memory.
That's right. I have heard of this. I heard a player make a joke about how he was going to use Keen Mind in lieu of taking good notes per session.
Yeah. That is pretty much what it does.
It just say, I don't know, DM, do I remember this?
You have Keen Mind. You remember everything.
Oh, man. That's good, though. I mean, hopefully a player doesn't abuse it, but...
As for feats that I think are underutilized or not really the best options in most cases, I think mounted combat is the one that I would select. Only because I think it's really limiting. One, you have to have a mount.
Yeah.
And generally, mounts don't go into dungeons or sewers or temples and such things.
I'm thinking, I can't think of the name, but I think there's a class build I saw once that is built around the existence of having a mount.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the Cavalier.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're right though. You take that away.
But it's very specific.
Yeah, unless you play in a campaign, I don't know.
Unless you are like in an army and you are just attacking and like with your troops and like that's what your game is. I don't see it being the most useful feat. I think there's a reason there's only the one instance of a mounted anything in terms of the feats.
Yeah, which is a shame because it could be really cool, and I am glad it is in there at least.
I'm glad the option exists for people who want it.
Yeah.
But I feel like if somebody takes it and then, the dungeon doesn't allow for the mount to enter easily, or it would be more trouble than it's worth, the player will just always feel like the DM's making them less useful.
Yeah. Does it work if you're riding a druid who has shape-shifted into a warhorse?
Maybe, yeah. Maybe that's the workaround. Maybe you and the druid are just tandem. Maybe you get an exotic saddle built just for the druid in a variety of shapes so they can beast form into a bear all the time.
Sure.
And you can ride the bear. Maybe that's the answer.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure if that would not create more problems down the road, but if you really wanted to do it, there's an option.
Yeah.
I got a few that I've been told, don't know from experience, that are not the best to take.
Okay.
Grappler, from my understanding, is maybe needs a rework. Rules is written.
Yeah, it's very limited because it pretty much only relates to grappling. Like if you intend to have your character hold somebody down,
right,
that's really all it does. It gives you advantage on grapple checks to make a grapple.
Yeah, it's situational, isn't it?
And you can attempt to use your creature to make another grapple check to pin that person, but by doing so you are both considered restrained, which means that all attacks against you have advantage.
Yeah.
So I don't know why it exists in the form that it does. It's one of the few feats that like calls out that you will have a negative condition upon you by using this ability.
Which seems like a waste of a feat, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those like in certain situations I can see, and I have been in situations where I wanted to justify my character grappling the opponent in some manner, but to have to take an entire feat for it to, and then it's not even a perfect feat. I don't know. I just probably avoid it, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And for that matter, Weapon Master is another that actually sounds good on paper, but from the way I've heard people explain it, it's just kind of a waste.
Yeah.
Like there are better options. Basically, right, it grants you a wider range of proficiencies in weapons, but...
Yeah, it increases your strength or dex score.
Well, which is not terrible.
By 1. But then you gain proficiency with 4 new weapons. For example, if you're a cleric, you only have simple weapon proficiencies.
Right.
Which means you can't use a longsword or a greatsword or anything like that. But if you take Weapon Master, you gain those proficiencies.
Right.
So you could be a cleric wielding a longsword and a shield instead of a cleric wielding a mace and a shield.
And maybe that is an answer for some people. The sort of possible better option maybe that I've heard is like even taking a level in a different class gives you those proficiencies.
You get a little bit more from taking a little 1 to 3 level dip in other classes.
Right. Or just increase your strength more,
Yeah, I mean, but it depends. If you're not concerned about getting that level 20 cleric ability.
Right.
Providing you survive to level 20, and let's be honest, who survives to level 20?
Exactly. Like, there's definitely an episode that should be dedicated to multi-classing, I think. And last but not least thing that I've been sort of warned against is Dungeon Delver.
Yeah.
Only because of it being so situational. It's kind of like a mount, like you said.
It is.
Like you need in a campaign. So Dungeon Delver, I'll explain it first, right?
Mm-hmm.
It gives you advantages for disarming traps, fighting traps, etc.
And secret doors.
So that's that in a nutshell. Not terrible, but unless you're finding unless you're always in a dungeon, your campaign is completely, you're getting traps all the time, maybe it's not so useful, and it might just, you could have picked something better.
Yeah, it all depends on what the campaign is. Actually, I could see it being useful if, when creating your character, you do the human variant, where you get a feat at first level.
Yeah.
And you take Dungeon Delver. It could be part of your backstory. You were an Indiana Jones type character, or you want to be an Indiana Jones type character.
True. I think that's a good point. There are some of these that are typically ranked as better or worse just on mechanics, but I don't think, for the most part, if you've got a really cool character or story-driven reason to pick something for flavor or whatever, go for it.
Mm-hmm.
So what if it's not, like we mentioned, Dual Wielder versus Great Weapon Master? Is one mechanically better than the other on paper? Yes. Does it matter? Really? No. I think Dual Weapon is cooler for my Dragonborn fighter. So at the end.
Yeah, it's all about what you want for your character. And feats are a way to facilitate that, to make your character yours and what you want it to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are so many.
Yeah, there are roughly 60, plus Unearthed Arcana, and I'm sure we're going to be getting more, if not in Rime of the Frost Maiden, definitely in Tasha's Carlton of Everything.
Yeah, so, this just scratches the surface.
Or I think the last time we got a really big edition of feats was Xanathar's Guide to Everything. And that's where a lot of the so-called racial feats came in.
Yeah, that's true. We didn't even really touch on those unless you count Bountiful Luck, but there are a few of those, aren't there?
Yes. So let's wrap up our discussion on feats here, Matt. Do you have any final thoughts?
No, I don't, actually.
You got them all out?
I know it's odd, but yeah, I haven't taken a lot myself, so I think we did pretty good covering what we know.
All right.
And I know I cheated. I'm passing on the advice of other people in some ways, but
I don't think spreading advice you find helpful is cheating.
Oh, that's good.
I personally really do like feats a lot. I think they add so much to a character in terms of flavor, and I appreciate when a player takes the time to look into their character and figure out how to make them more their own. How to tweak your character, make it feel more customized, more your own. And sometimes they aren't about combat optimization, but instead about character optimization. And I think that's a fun way to go with them sometimes.
Yeah, I agree. And I like the idea of the sort of flavor behind feat as being your character has been out in the world training and getting better at things, and now they're at a place where they can say, hey, I'm a master at the crossbow or whatever.
And especially if, like most characters, before you join your party at level 1, level 2, you haven't experienced the crazy things that you suddenly start experiencing.
Yeah.
And maybe you haven't worked with a sorcerer before, but then you see how they do things and you maybe pick up a few tricks on manipulating magic.
Yeah, I agree. They're fun, especially when you're, like we said earlier, when you're at a good place with your ability scores. They're fun, interesting ways to make your character so versatile.
Absolutely.
Check them out. There's lots, like we said, a lot more than we talked about.
We didn't want to do just a grocery list of feats and here's what they are. We mentioned a few that we really like and a few that we aren't so much a fan of, but for the most part, they're all pretty great and pretty useful. Well, we would like to thank you all for joining us on this adventure. Come along with us next time as we talk about an intrinsic part of most D&D games, spells and magic. Remember to check out our friend and the composer of all the music we use here on Mid-Level Adventurers, John D. Ivy on SoundCloud.com. Please follow us on Twitter and Instagram at MidLVLAdventure and be part of the conversation.
And please check out our website on Wix at midleveladventurer.wixsite.com. And feel free to email us at midleveladventurers@gmail.com.
And as always, I'm Jarrod Jehoda.
And I'm Matt Morris.
Until then, mind the traps and keep adventuring.